Good evening to all the participants, and thank you IIRSM for giving opportunity for this webinar event. In next 45 to 60 minutes, I am going to talk about emergency response and how emergency oil and gas. We do the emergency response planning sectors, which also include major accident hazard installations. During this presentations, we are going to cover these topics. We will have a overview of emergency response plan with respect to the key definitions, purpose, type of emergency, and level of emergency. We will also discuss about the statutory and regulatory requirement, especially applicable in Indian context for developing and maintaining emergency plan. We will talk about EIP. This is nothing but a emergency response and disaster management plan as per the government regulation. The body in India called Petroleum and Natural Gas Regulatory Body. So they have developed this framework for developing a plan and getting this certified before this is put in place or implemented. In the process, we will also talk about drills and rehearsal and success factor for ERP and best practices. So these two topics will be open actually for the participants for discussions. Friends, before we start the subjects, many of the participants may be knowing about the major disaster that has happened in India and in other part of the globes. The one which is one of the worst disaster that has hit is known as the Bhopal gas tragedy. We will spend a few minutes on that. Another incident was the Piper Alpha. There was a major fire in Jaipur oil depot that was in 2009, and there was a LG polymer. It is nothing but a monomer styrene leak from one of the facility. This is post lockdown in India. This is the Bhopal gas tragedy. The incident took place on 2nd and 3rd December of 1984. And in that case, what happens, there was a leakage of methyl isocyanate, a highly toxic material released from the storage tank, causing into death of more than 2,500 persons who are outside the facility and injuring more than 2 lakhs persons. So this is the one of the worst disasters, and after these disasters, the need for this on-site emergency plan, off-site emergency plan, and the very strict controls on these major accident hazard installations were put by the government authorities, including the organization, the top management, and everybody who is involved. So that was a point where there was a need which was felt to have a very systematic plan. If we have a systematic plan, then we can reduce the impact of any emergency to a large extent. Now we will be talking about a few definitions. What is the purpose of emergency response plan? What are the various type of emergency and level of emergency? Because our preparedness will depend based on the level that is going to cause. Uh, this is the definition of emergency, which is given by the Red Cross Society. Any life-threatening situation which requires administration of life-saving measures immediately to save the precious life and minimize impacts. One of the way of looking at emergency is it is an unexpected condition or event which require a specific action plan, because if each event is unique and according to these events the actions are very specific which has to be put in place to normalize the situations. The examples are like the fire, explosion, leak of products, gas, loss of containments, or any other threats. This is the definition of the disaster. This is the last stage of a undesired or unplanned event. It is an occurrence that has disturbed normal way of our life, normal condition of existence, which is causing a level of suffering that exceeds capacity of adjustment of affected communities. That means the community or the surrounding or the organizations itself is not capable of dealing with the emergency or the disaster scenario. So disaster in similar way, these are the other technology which is used for the disaster. It is just we call it as a uncompensated incidents. Sometimes we call it as a catastrophes or major accidents. So these are all the synonymous terms which we are using for these disasters. What exactly we do with the emergency response plan? It is nothing but an action to organize employees or persons action to workplace emergency, to address the workplace emergency in a very efficient way. A well-developed emergency plan with a proper training and resources will result in fewer injury, less structural damage to the facility during the emergency. If there is no plan, if we go back to that Bhopal incident, at that time there was no concept of the offsite emergency plan, and that's why the person who are not connected with that site, they have lost their precious life. None of the person inside factory got affected. So this is the primary purpose or the intent or objective of an emergency planning and implementation. The prime or very first objective of emergency planning is to protect the human life, whether it is inside the facility or outside the facilities, because the human life once lost cannot be recovered. That's where that should be our first or the top priority. Our all efforts should be directed towards saving the life first. Then next comes the minimizing the plant property damage and the effect on the assets. How we can minimize the property damage, right from action taking at the design stage, then the installations, facility siting, and so many other aspects are there for minimizing the property damage. We also ensure how we can minimize impact on the environment and the surrounding, because the protecting environment and surrounding is also very important, because the environment which we are going to give will give a life to the future generation. Environment is for the future generations. We have to also ensure the safety of the persons who are directly dealing with the emergency, first responders or the backup lines. So their safety is also a part of emergency plan. Or at the end, it is also very important to organize, to sustain reputation of the company, how fast they can recover or normalize and maintain the reputation. So if there is a very good planning, then we can maintain a very good image of organization. Now this emergency planning is an integral part of overall management process or management system. These are typically the two type of emergencies. One is we call it as a man-made emergencies, which is because of the technology or the human factors. These are broadly classified into two categories. One is the industrial accident and second is the transport related accidents. The industrial accidents are the accident like the fire, explosions, leak, poisoning or so on, radiation leaks, which is happening within a installations. The transport is during transport of products like through the rail, road, airs. We are transporting lot of materials by various means, even by the pipeline also is part of that disaster, man-made disaster. Now the another category is the natural disasters, which is because of the geophysical activities like the earthquake, landslides, volcanoes. These are few examples. Then another category is the meteorological events like the flood, cyclone, heavy rain. So these are the two broad categories of the emergency. Now, based on the impact also and by the regulation also and for the effective management and the resource deployment, emergencies are divided in three levels: level 1, level 2 and level 3. Level 1 is a emergency which is a emergency at the starting point. It is minor in nature. It can be managed by the organization itself within their own resources, and the impacts are very limited, and it doesn't have a escalation potential. That means the emergency happening in a particular plant is confined within that plant. That is called the level 1 emergency. So this is with respect to the consequence or the impact of emergency. Second category of this emergency is the level 2. Level 2 is an emergency which is possible or likely to impact outside, or suppose there are the multiple plants within one site, then it is possible that emergency can extend from one plant to other plant. So in that scenario, what we need external supports to contain the level 2 emergency like the mutual aid partners, and in this case there is a likely danger to the life, environment, asset or reputation if it is not controlled or managed in a very efficient way. Then the level 2 may escalate to level 3. Level 3 emergency is an emergency which is crossing the installation boundary, which will have a offsite impacts like the Bhopal disasters, Jaipur fires, any incident which is happening on the roads. And in that scenario, what will happen? The control and command that emergency is taken district administration or by the government authorities, and the company will work very closely in consultation of administrations and so these are the okay. Now what are the various regulations which is in the India related to this emergency planning and response plan. This Environment Protection Act 1986, this came after the Bhopal disaster. Then a rule like manufacturing, storage, import of hazardous chemical rules 1989. This also will have a requirement for on-site and off-site emergency plan based on the inventory of the materials, hazardous materials, be it toxic, be it flammables, or any other hazards that are controlled. Then there are the PNGRB or ERDMP regulations, emergency response DMP regulations, which we will talk a little details also regarding how this regulation is structured and where this regulation applies. So this particular regulation applies for the oil and gas installations, okay, like the city gas distribution systems, cross-country pipelines, storage depots. So all the downstream facilities and other where this regulation applies, the plan has to be prepared according to that regulations, formats, templates, so that nothing is missed. So we will touch upon the salient feature of these, the recent change in the regulation. There is a NOS DCP also, this National Oil Spill Disaster Contingency Plan, which is normally prepared by the Indian Coast Guard body, and Based on that national oil spill contingency plan, the state levels and the district level and the industry level or location level plans are prepared. So these plans are also prepared and approved by these authorities. Based on various type of resource requirement are also there, depending on the type of materials we are handling. There are regulations like the Factories Act 1948 and the state factories rules. They are also talking about the various requirement or various specific formats how the plan should be prepared. So that is applicable for the factories, registered factories. There are the mines, various type of mines, oil mine regulations, to which also talk about the need for this emergency plan and which is part of the safety management plan. There is one regulation like the safety and offshore regulations. So like the SPM and these, they also need to have a plan. So requirements are given. So these are the purposes. So there are various regulations around this emergency planning in this. So there is a body, technical body in India called Oil Industry Safety Directorate. So they have developed various standards on safety and this. So there is one standard titled as Emergency Response and Preparedness for E&P Industries, Exploration and Production Industry. This 227. So this also have a guidelines related to that. And in India, there is an act called Disaster Management Act 2005 and subsequent rules. These are mainly to deal with the natural disasters. So these are the requirements related to that. Now I'm just briefly covering about this emergency response and disaster management plans. There is a regulations. So this any emergency planning, if you look at this point, whenever any incident happens, so if we are prepared, then we can minimize the impact of those incidents. So this is the very basic fundamental for how efficiently we can respond to the incident, emergency, crisis or disasters, so that is the first priority. Now the another is a proactive thing. Our all efforts should be toward the preventive and mitigation measures. Then we should have a reconstruction once the disaster is there, how fast we can recover and bring back to normal situation. So this is how these are the 4 phases of a process of emergency management. So what we are talking about currently is the preparedness and response. So how are we ready for various kind of emergencies? Have we identified various kind of emergencies through a very structured and scientific method, depending on the type of industries? The various kind of studies are done. Okay, and based on that, the scenarios are developed, like pre-incident planning and scenarios, and accordingly the response strategy is made. And these are tested periodically by involving the plant persons, so that they are aware what to do in the event of any sort of emergency. Now, this is the typical structure. I will not go into details of this thing, but this is the regulations. So there are various clauses are there. This regulation has a 31 clause, which are talking about the various aspects of emergency response and disaster management plan. In this, there was some amendment was done within that 31 clauses. So these are the title, or we can say the index, what overall emergency plan should consist of. So any regulation normally starts with the definitions. So all the definitions are given. What is on-site emergency plan? What is off-site emergency plan? What is emergency? And who all are the authorities involved? So these are defined. Then the applicability and the scope and intent is defined. Then there is a classification of emergency, consequence of default of non-compliance. When the law is formed, so they will give a certain timelines that we have to comply within those defined timelines. Then the pre-emergency planning, mitigation measures, emergency response measures, response procedures and measures, emergency organization. This is also very, very important because the role, responsibility and organization chart, which will see a typical or the organization, how the emergency organization is set up, then what all infrastructures are required for effective management of emergency, like the emergency control center, communication system, fire and emergency equipments, all those things, medical facilities, they are all part of this thing. Then what is the protocol for declaration of on-site and off-site emergency? Resource for controlling emergency, what kind of resources are required? The demographic information is very, very important, especially when there are the multi-location facilities are there, or a plant which is located in the various geographies, so that also will play an important role. Then the evacuation process, public relation and information to public, how do we intimate to the public, how do we maintain good relation with the publics, how do we educate them? If an incident happens, which is the starting point of emergency, then there are the reporting guidelines are also there. Action after reporting of incident by the, once the incident is reported, then what actions they are supposed to take, how to terminate, what is the process for termination of emergency. These are the specific scenarios. If there is a road transportation case, then how to deal with that. So this is the specific protocols which is normally followed for the road transportations. Then the security threat plan is also a part of this emergency planning process, and there are some miscellaneous requirements. This particular regulation all will have a 9C. There are 7 checklists are there. These checklists are very, very exhaustive checklists, and these checklists are used in validating and certifying the plans, right from the preventive mitigation measures and all other aspects of these things. The design, engineerings, resource adequacy, testings, all those things are checked through these very, very detailed checklists are there. There are formats which is also part of this emergency planning, which is like the material safety data sheets for the hazardous materials being used, stored, handled at the sites. There are guidelines for emergency response plan with respect to how to develop this emergency plan for construction and projects, and there are typical mock drill reporting formats also. Now, I think this we have discussed this. This is what is the definitions. We are making a plan for specific sectors. We are any specific sectors, so we need to refer those particular sector specific requirement for development of the plan. Who is project in charge? Then there were some changes which is made in the definition. Formats have been added. Risk assessment, transport emergency card, SPs, these were the requirement which is added part of this overall process, emergency planning. This particular regulation, as we discussed, is applicable for all petroleum and petroleum product pipelines, all depots, installations, terminals, natural gas storage facilities, retail outlets like the auto LPG, LNG, CNG, and transportation of products by road. This is the scope. This is the one of the typical requirement for the ERDP development. What normally happens is these two locations or two installations can never be identical in respect to the layouts, their surroundings, storage quantities, meteorological conditions. Therefore, the whatever plan we are preparing, it has to be a location specific as far as possible, so that we take into account all factors while making the plan. in certain case like cross-country pipelines or the distribution networks or the outlets, road transportations, uh, the entity or the facility, they can prepare a single DMP, ERDMP, uh, but the location specific informations can be detailed. The common facilities or the common operating points, they can have detailed out in the documentation. Or if they want, they can have a entity specific ERDMP documents. So there can be either single or location specific information, or entity can make a single documents. And these documents will undergo a scrutiny by a government approved agencies. They will test it, they will check it, review an alignment with the requirement, then only they approve the plan. And this approved plans copies goes to the authorities for the reports also. This is also what we are talking about, where we can make a similar plans like a identical ROs at multiple locations. So we can group together and make a single plan and put this plan at this facilities with the similar features, like the RO with LPG, RO without LPG. We can have a one set of plan. This is at different locations. We can have one plan, replicate this plan at multiple locations. The RO on highway, RO within the, some villages. For road transportations also, they need to identify a very specific routes and prepare a typical ERDMP and share this ERDMP with the various stakeholders in accordance with the regulations. In construction projects also, the project specific this plan is prepared, which is approved by the project in charge, project head, project directors, and then this document covers as per the annexure, or there are the detailed guidelines for that. Now, one of the requirement is once the plan is made, then this board of that concerned entity will monitor compliance of ERDMP either directly or indirectly through a accredited body to give assurance that plan is up to date and it is operational. It is not put in the cell. That is the purpose of this. If this is not being followed, then the entity may receive a non-compliance notice from the authorities. The mitigation measures, as we are talking about this mitigation is as a plan. They should have a part of the emergency planning process. So very robust health, safety, and environment management system in place to aid during the operational. Ensure safety layer of protections are there in the plant. The layer we should not so that is by this environment or HSE management system, which includes the briefing to the visitors, also what to do in the event of emergency, like a do's don't kind of things in the emergency, where the assembly point. And this briefing can be covered by a videos, maybe through presentation, through some handouts, pocket cards. So there are various ways by which the visitors briefing can be done, so that they are also aware about what to do in the event of emergency when they are visiting particular facilities. Now, the part is also one of the requirements. Once the plan is made, then it is very important that we test or we rehearsal the plan at periodic interval. So as per the law, depending on the scenario, whether it is a level 1 or level 2 or level 3 emergency, so normally level 1 and level 2 emergency drill must be conducted once in 3 months to make sure that the systems are functioning. And offsite drill is conducted in consultation with authorities and the relevant stakeholders once in a year. So these are the requirement by the regulations. And this drill findings or the learning from these drills, so there are the standard templates and formats which is available as a part of regulations. So there should be filled and submitted to authority on quarterly basis, periodic basis. Now, as far as the offsite emergency plan is concerned, so normally offsite emergency plans are prepared by a district authority, taking into consideration of on-site emergency plan of all the facilities coming under his jurisdictions. So the authorities through his this factory inspectorate or the authorities, they collect the informations about on-site emergency plan, what are the major accident scenarios from all, like somewhere there is a storage of the ammonia storage or chlorine storage, somewhere pipes, somewhere radiation. So all those informations are put together and the authorities will make offsite emergency plan for the particular testing. Then all stakeholders, including government bodies, they do the drill about that. Mock drills, as we discussed, the mock drill should be recorded with observations and deficiency. We can include the observers at various locations in the mock drills, and based on this, whatever learnings are there, so one should make a time-bound action plan for rectification of findings and improvement on this process. Now, these are the key roles which is a part of the emergency planning, because role and responsibility at each level must be defined clearly, it must be documented, it must be communicated. So these four are the key positions as a part of organizations. So any organizations, they should have a designated a senior person designated as a chief emergency incident controllers. The next important position is the site incident controller. Third position is the admin and communication coordinators. And fourth position or role is the fire safety coordinator and fire team. So these four are key positions. They are immediately required to respond in the of any kind of emergency. And then there are the support or auxiliary roles also, like the human resource and the welfare service coordinator, logistic and transport coordinator, operational and technical support or that coordinator person who is taking care of media, public relations, and the security coordinators. What is the role of security and the recorder? Of course, the scribe is also required to have a chronological what's happening in actual emergency. So these are the minimum roles which must be there as a part of emergency organogram, and it should be written with the particular name, with the contact numbers, if person is not available, what are the backup arrangement. This is also very important. If you look at that, this is how a typical organization, emergency organization look like. This site incident controllers will have a support services like admin and communication, fire safety, HSC coordinators, who is working under him in the event of any emergency. Then there is a chief incident controllers who is the taking command in the event of level 2 or level 3 emergency. He is also from the senior person from the site, and chief incident controller will be interacting with the liaising with the various bodies like the mutual aids, this fire brigades, medical services, ambulance, police services, mutual transport rescue, affected stakeholders, government authorities, and all those things. And he is in continuous touch with these various authorities, various support services through the offsite incident controller, that is the district magistrate or district authority. So this is typical organogram based on the site setup. This organogram should be finally turned into tabulated forms or in the form of matrix or rota, who all is holding this position at a particular moments, along with their contact detail and this. So this is also very important. Along with this, their role and responsibility at each levels, along with the some guides, some that is also very important for these key positions. This is the communication flow in the event of emergency. So when there is a level 1 emergency, then this emergency control center is one who will receive information about emergency from various sources, either first responders or through the technology like fire and gas detection system, through the police, from the employees, securities, publics. They receive the information. This is what we call it as a first information about the situation or unplanned events. Then from the emergency control center, the message goes to the site incident controller, and depending on the level of emergency, the further communication takes place. There could be a high level of management team which will come into picture when there is a level 2 or level 3, or they are basically a tactical team or strategic teams. Or some companies, they call it as a crisis management group. So how they are communicating and interacting with the emergency control centers or site incident control center. Then chief incident control centers will be interacting with district administrations and the governments in the event of level 2 event. They just intimate it, inform it, and level 3 they fully support, fully coordinate, continues till the emergency is over or it is declared now the emergency is normal. This is what we call the termination of the emergency. This is what we just discussed about. Then Siren Code is also a very important aspects to decide what is the level of emergency. So the code could be decided by the individual locations, but the level 1 they can decide themselves what kind of siren tone they want to use to declare the level 1 emergency. Then if there is a level 2 emergency, then wheeling tone for 2 minutes. If there is a level 3 emergency, then wheeling, it is same as level 2, but there will be a interval of 1 minute. That means the 2-minute siren, 1 minute gap, 2-minute siren, 1 minute gap. So that way there will be a total 8 minutes of duration. That means the 2 minutes will be repeated continuously 3 times at an interval of 1 minute. So these are the siren codes, and the people should be aware of. They can be displayed at various locations so the person know if this is the code, then what is the level of emergency and what response they are supposed to follow. Reporting the incident, this is what is required by the regulations. All incident, whether it is a minor or near misses, so the register or data should be maintained by the entity or respective facilities in a format which is given in that thing. The major incidents, the entity are expected to report to the authorities within 48 hours after occurrence of incident. FIR, they can FIR of major incident. If any major incident is there, then they need to send the FIR or information within 4 hours of occurrence, not later than that. These are the there are criteria to define the major accidents. Like if the loss is about 20 lakhs, then it is termed as a major incident. Other criteria are also there. So like the loss of mandates, fatalities, uh, community loss of man hours. So there are 4-5 criteria are there, which is used to classify whether it is a major incident or not. And major incident, the detailed investigations are carried out uh, by the boards and by the committee, and the report is submitted to the board within 30 days, and along with the action plan of recommendations made. So this is a learning from learning incidents, so that these learning could be fast deployed across all other industries to prevent similar kind of thing. Then there is one more requirement, is that there is a quarterly report or quarterly return is also required to be submitted for all the major accident or incidents uh, to the boards within 30 days of end of every quarter. So every quarterly report must go to the board, so that the board is aware, and they are also monitoring this thing. The reason being, if we track all the minor and major incidents, including near misses, we do investigate, then implement the recommendations coming out of this thing, we can prevent major accidents or emergency. So that's the whole idea of this populating the data and reporting to the authority. Action after reporting of incident by AD. If a incident is reported, then there will be a follow-up for the investigations. As we discussed, the incident must be investigated by the relevant authorities. Then the action need to be tracked till closure, and root causes are identified. Inquiry committee is set up for thorough investigations. These are the few category of investigations where a government make a inquiry committee, like the explosion or blast, this fire involving fatalities or the major fires, some pipeline leakage, product pipeline leakage, petroleum pipeline leakage, these, and any other incident which is decided by the board, depending on the potential and its later learning. And this whole process should happen in a very structured or very methodical, very structured way. The TOR for the committee should include what the TOR, what the form should include, this investigation findings, the identification of the lapses or shortcomings, the establishing the root cause of failure, suggest improvement or remedial measures to prevent reoccurrences, and such committee will submit preliminary report within a week and final report within. So these are the timelines for completing the investigation. This is again a part of the mitigation measures or our all HSE management systems, so that we learn lesson from the incident and avoid emergency, crisis or disaster like situations within entity. Security threat plan, this is also a requirement that the security threat plan be made as a part of overall emergency planning. Like there is a bomb threats, there is a drone attacks, so all those security threat assessment to be done, and all scenarios to be included, and the planning, then definitely the mock drills of various scenarios to be done once in every year, so that the persons are aware how to address the security related emergency or threats. So that's from these are the implementation guidelines for these from the regulation. When the regulation came into force, the timelines were given. The on-site emergency plan to be submitted within 3 months, off-site emergency plan to authority to be submitted within 3 months. All resources which is required to be positioned within 6 months. Then accredited third-party certification. This is one of the key requirement of emergency planning. This plan need to be certified by a third party, which is recognized by the authority within 1 year from the publication of these regulations. Then testing and mock drills, which is 3 months every quarter, this has to be done, and testing and mock drill of the offsite emergency scenario 12 months. So this is the typical MSDS code, which is also a source of information, which would be part of that. We should know what kind of materials we are handling, we are storing. So this we can find from the material safety data sheet. Then this is the typical plan, how the plan look like in the construction content, like the statutory requirement, pre-emergency planning, emergency mitigation measures, preparedness measures. These are the content for emergency plan, emergency organization, responsibilities, resource for controlling emergency, emergency recovery procedures, and this is a typical mock drill formats, either it's on-site, date and time of mock drills. So this is the format mock drill report includes. The important thing is the point 10 and 11. So what are the good things? So what are the positive points? And what are the recommendations? So these should be tracked, report should be submitted. So for the mock drills, and mock drill should cover all scenarios. This should be done in the event of course, so shift and holiday also to holiday. Check response in the efficacy of the resource and the silent hours or odd hours. These are the agencies which is available on website of this authority, which is PNGRB. So they have identified these. There are the impaneled agencies are there. Their validity is there. The one that go to website and get the plan vetted and approved by the third-party agency. So this process normally takes 2 to 3 months period to validate and certify and approve the ERDMP. Once the ERDMP is approved by a government approved third party agency, this is TPI, then this approved copy is submitted to district authorities, these boards, and the stakeholders affected by this emergency, and copy should be kept at emergency control center, which is readily available. So these are the name of few of the investigation bodies who are doing like this Bureau Veritas, this Root Thinkers, this IR class. So there are many agencies, adequate agencies are there for certifications. So entity can connect with these agency and get their plan certified. That's from my side. Thank you, all the attendees, all the participants.
Thank you so much, Dennis, for a very formative presentation and information. There's actually a question that came through, and the question is, quarterly reporting to PNGRB, is that mandatory? And what is the definition of NEMIS as per PNGRB? And quarterly reporting, is that required for major or minor incident in the industry?
Yes. So the definition of near miss is same as the industries are following. Any incident that has happened, but there is no significant consequence, but there is a potential for serious injury. That is what we call near miss. Okay. So all near miss, all incident along with the investigation needs to be submitted to authority PNGRB on periodic basis quarterly. The reason being they track, are we investigating all the incidents, are we learning lesson from this, and as a mitigation measure, is our system mature? If we learn from the near miss, if we learn from incidents, then we will not land into the emergency situation. That's the whole intent actually. This is basically the monitoring by an independent authority, that the protocol, we have a robust HSE management system in place.
Okay, very good. Any more questions, anyone? If you can drop it down to the chat function and I could read it out, and we'll just give probably a few seconds more, though, and then we'll think we should just end the presentation.
I have given my contact address, email, and phone numbers. So even if after the webinar you have any questions, you can drop me the mail or connect me through phones. I will be happy to answer the questions.
Yep, it looks like there's no more questions. So as Danish mentioned, you can write your question directly to us or directly to Danish, and he will happily answer the questions that you may have. And just to remind you, this presentation is also available, will be available on our YouTube channel shortly after this session has ended, and you can recap by clicking the link. Okay, thank you so much, Danish. Very, very informative, very, very worthwhile of our evening, well, of your evening and our afternoon here. Would like to thank you so much for your time and your contribution, and thank you everyone for attending. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks.
No problem. Thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye. Bye.